How's it going, everybody? I'm Zach, and this is the Typical Rug channel. If you're like me, you're often looking at the news, searching on the internet, seeing what's going on in the world. And recently, AI and artificial intelligence is getting a lot of traction. And recently I saw this story, came out of Chile, by these two researchers right here. I'll also throw a link up on screen to the article and put their names on screen because I can't exactly pronounce them. Essentially, the first part of the Santiago theory of cognition and interference defines cognition and how it works. They say consciousness is on a spectrum, and that basically life cannot exist without cognition and cognition cannot exist without life. And they define cognition as the ability to react to one's environment and to understand and reciprocate the reaction. For example, you can understand what I'm saying in this video and you're able to process what I'm saying to you and actually make a coherent thought of it. Whereas something like a plant would exhibit cognition differently. Like, say a plant would grow in the direction of the sunlight, or some plants are able to turn off their waterways or direct more or less nutrients to come to them in rainy or dry seasons. So, to summarize the first half of Santiago's theory is defined as this: cognition is not a representation, of an independently existing world, but rather the act of bringing forth a world throughout living and relating to certain events and processes. The second half of Santiago's theory, known as interference, deals with the term cognitive interference, which is when random, inappropriate, or negative thoughts pass through your brain. It's sort of a way for your brain to perform a cognitive self-assessment, rather. When you're not using your cognitive functions, performing a task or something else, your brain has a conversation with itself and suggests to you ideas on whether or not to confirm or deny those ideas, so to speak. Like, for example, there are certain ideas that you haven't thought about as, like, bad, like in a way that you haven't sat down and thought, like, hey, this is bad. It's something you just generally understand. Another example of that would be like when you're driving, if you get a random thought of like, oh, what happens if I swerve off the road? That's your brain updating like a sort of moral checklist, so to speak, like confirming to you in that moment of like you not using your cognitive senses for anything, confirming that, hey, this is bad, this is something we do not want to do. Essentially, all that this part of the theory is saying is that interactions between living systems can disrupt, alter, or otherwise amplify the degree of consciousness that any living thing would exhibit. Inevitably, the question was posed, what would happen if somebody had all their cognitive senses removed under this theory? For example, sight, touch, taste, etc. They would be unable to understand anything about their environment, and then what would happen to that interference before mentioned, the cognitive interference, if the brain was allowed to give prolonged suggestions in this state? Because alternatively, what snaps you out of that state is your confirmation, your cognitive reaction to say, hey, no, this is bad. But if all that was stripped away, what would happen if you allowed this prolonged interference to continue? Well, that's where the theory starts to get some holes in it, because the theory states that something must be able to first interact with its environment and reciprocate some form of response to have cognition in the first place. So if something cannot be alive without being cognitive, then what is a living thing without that cognition? I have recently seen several articles relating this theory to artificial intelligence and how it may affect the growth of that field in the future. I'm really uncertain with the whole thing. I just wanted to share this story with you guys. Hope you enjoy.